Hi, my name is Ophi YouTube Videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian. I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things. You saw the title and the thumbnail. You already know what this video is about, but pretend with me for a second that you don't. Because today I want to talk about a podcaster, an internet personality, a man who, yeah, sure, sometimes acts, but who has released over 100 episodes of a podcast, one with the word man in its very title. The podcast man is married. Before his podcast, his video proposal to his wife went viral. He credits himself in it multiple times and makes sure to show up before his wife does, so his name will be listed first in those credits. He followed this up with a pregnancy announcement a few years later. When this man's wife bore him a daughter, he wrote a letter praising his wife, no, all women, for this act of procreation. And when his wife bore him a son, he said, "Baby, you get to be done." I feel pretty confident assuming that somebody learning that first scatterplot of information about a man without any other context would make some assumptions, like that he has some weird ideas about gender, maybe, at the most generous, and that he might be doing some sort of manosphere grift with his podcast at the least. And the more information I add to this equation, it becomes somehow both more complicated and simpler. Simpler to lean into manosphere expectations when I tell you that he's written multiple books on masculinity, that his primary defenders are the likes of Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens, or maybe, even though I said we could disregard the acting thing, that he sexually harassed an actress on the set of a film he was directing and starring in. A woman who he would wage a very expensive PR takedown campaign against. But for some people, this gets more complicated than it needs to be by just one little wrinkle. Justin Baldoni tells you he's a feminist. Or his branding does, at least. The podcast's full title is Man Enough, and it is co-hosted by Jamie Heath, a man also accused of creating an uncomfortable and harassive working environment on the set of It Ends With Us film, and who appears in many of the emails sent back and forth with that crisis PR team that this feminist hired, because, quoting texts from the PR demons here, Podcast Man wanted to feel like the lead actress could be buried. In attempts to satisfy Podcast Man, the PR agents would go on to create a crisis planning document with possible routes their campaign against the actress could take. Tactics we've seen taking place in recent weeks, like her friendship with Taylor Swift being called into the narrative. And in an act of projection so stunning it ended up being the entire thesis of this video, the Podcast Man's team wanted to accuse Taylor Swift and Blake Lively of weaponizing feminism. So, since they gave me such a wonderful phrase for it, let's talk about Justin Baldoni's weaponized feminism. Though I should caveat, as I will be laying out in this video, and as you may have gleaned from just this introduction, I think it is a little bit more generous than I feel to call anything Justin Baldoni has done feminist, in the full context of his impact on the cultural conversation right now and his lack of, actual feminist actions that weren't about stroking his own tiny, pathetic, soaking wet meow meow ego. But before I show you what a feminist very much does not look like, I would like to thank today's sponsor, Aura. If you've ever wondered how scammers get your phone number or why your inbox is full of spam, I can tell you it's because of data brokers, as in companies who are brokering your data. They do it without your consent, and they make billions of dollars selling it to marketers, scammers, and even stalkers. Data brokers are legally required to remove your information if you ask, but they make the process confusing and intentionally difficult, often making you create an account and give them even more of your data just to request that they take it down, which they will for a little bit before they put it back up. Which is why I recommend today's sponsor, Aura, to my family and my friends. They take care of this for me, the hard part of requesting to get things taken down, and the follow-up to make sure it stays off the internet. Aura is all-in-one digital security, and you might already have some sort of digital security tool, but not having Aura is like locking the front door, but leaving the back door wide open. Aura keeps an eye on all sorts of things for me, and they can keep an eye on it for you too. I get alerts if my personal information is found on the dark web, and real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, 24/7 monitoring to help keep my identity secure, a secure VPN, a password manager, and more. And the support is available 24/7 if something goes wrong. So either with the up to $5 million in identity theft insurance protection that they offer me or my antivirus, there are experts ready to help around the clock. And all of this in just one app. Every layer of protection. I've been using Aura since the beginning of this year, and they've taken really great care of me. I've had great experiences with customer service. Like I said, even when I had a genuinely silly question about my antivirus in the middle of the night, Aura helps to keep me safe online, which is really important to me as a public feminist on the internet. And every time I get an email with a new opt-out request they put in on my behalf, I breathe a little easier. That's why I choose Aura, and if you want to choose Aura too, you can try it for free for 14 days at aura.com/ofidoki or by scanning the QR code on the screen right now. In those 2 weeks, you'll discover where your data is being exposed and sold. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and I don't want anybody in the nuance corner to either. Thank you again so much to Aura for sponsoring this video and so many others on this channel. I am to the chagrin of the kind of people who loved how definitions like feminism is the radical notion that women are people allowed them to turn off their brain and critical thinking, somebody who believes that feminism needs to have standards and aims. Specifically, I believe that feminism should be a type of activism that seeks to serve the needs of women, children, and people of marginalized gender. I believe that a feminism that is not primarily concerned with this triage of the needs of people most harmed by the patriarchal society we live in is not feminism at all. And if you don't like my definition, bell hooks, someone Justin Baldoni also quotes, though he doesn't seem to actually know the title of her book, The Will to Change, because I'm pretty sure he read some quotes on Goodreads and not the whole thing. She defines feminism as a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. So, a feminism, for example, that doesn't champion reproductive justice is not seeking to end sexism, sexist exploitation, or oppression. A feminism that goes beyond not just not seeking reproductive justice, but into actively prescribing gender roles and a fixation on natalism is so far outside of the boundaries of anything we could describe as feminist. Or at least it is if you're able to undo just a little bit of the damage that the era of "this is what a feminist looks like" t-shirts and choice feminism brought upon all of us. Feminist is not a thing you decide about yourself, wear on a t-shirt, and get to call yourself forever. Feminism is not a deep-seated belief that things should be fair. Feminism is not just not wanting to be sexist or to think of yourself as hating women. Feminism is more. It has to be more, and you do a disservice to yourself and to every other person on the planet who could be positively impacted by feminism every time you allow feminism to mean nothing, every time you don't ask for more from it. This era of "this is what a feminist looks like" t-shirts is long over. Honestly, they went out of style before calling yourself a feminist also slipped out of most people's list of priorities. And though I do want more actual feminists thinking to describe themselves that way, I am happy to call a time of death on the era of feminism that allowed you to opt in with a shirt purchase and then opt back out every time it seemed more fun to take the path of least resistance and jump onto a hate train against a woman, disbelieve a victim, or defend her abuser. "This is what a feminist looks like" is dead. Long live "this is not a fucking feminist." I want to start our journey into this odd natalist Bahai feminism with what I understand to be Justin Baldoni's first purportedly feminist piece. "A Love Letter to My Wife, Daughter, and All Women" was among his earliest public ventures into talking about gender, published in 2015. "A Love Letter to My Wife, Daughter, and All Women," originally published on Baldoni's social media, begins,
"Dear women, and any men willing to read this."
Okay, I promise I won't interrupt every few words once we get rolling, but keep that "and any man willing to read this" tucked away in your brain for later, okay? Because any man willing to read this is actually going to be something like a Rosetta Stone for understanding anything Baldoni writes. It will be primarily enjoyed, consumed, and shared by women, and despite his purported feminism, just a little bit of digging into Justin Baldoni will show you just how much that eats him up for his audience to be primarily women. But anyway, getting ahead of myself, the letter continues.
Please forgive me as I gently offer up this prayerful reflection about my experience as a man during the pregnancy and birth of my daughter. This is a love letter to my wife, to my newborn daughter, and to you.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Okay. Sorry. Continuing, but as I already said in the introduction, it's just a letter about how awesome he thinks it is when his wife has his baby.
I have never in my life witnessed such grace, such beauty, such intuition and instinct, such heroism and power, such prayerfulness and steadfastness, and such joy and happiness as I did these past 9 months. I may have thought I loved my wife before, but I'm not exaggerating when I say I absolutely worship her now. Emily chose to make our little Maia's birth a ceremony of love, and all I could do was say thank you, thank you, thank you, through tears and tears of gratitude. If you're a man reading this and you have a wife, take a second, stop, and simply embrace her. Tell her how grateful you are she exists, and let her know how honored you are to be able to experience life with her. Let her know you trust her intuition and that she is perfect. If you're a woman reading this, look in the mirror, stare into your own eyes, and know that you have everything you will ever need in front of you. It's literally inside you, and you are amazing and capable of literally anything. Know that anything a man can do, you can do, and probably better. And there are things that you can accomplish in this life that a man could never dream of, because they were destined to be accomplished by you. So if you see a glass ceiling, know that it is only there so you can shatter it. Know that you are beautiful just as you are, and you, my dear, are more than enough. You are perfection. These are the words I pray my little Maya will hear throughout her life, from not just me, but from all the men in her world. This is my prayer of gratitude and hope for all women. This is a reflection of a humbled and awestruck man who had the bounty of witnessing the power, the supremacy, and the radiance of the feminine. This is simply a letter of love, and a letter filled with love from a new father to anyone who needs to hear or read this. If that's you, just know I love you, Justin.
I actually learned about this letter from an episode of the A Bit Fruity podcast, where my friend Kat Tenbarge was a guest and pointed out how, the big procreation bent here isn't exactly something most, or probably any actual feminists would agree is an inherently feminist thing at all. It's correct, and it's a point she's one of the only people I've seen even bother to make. Many other tellings of Justin Baldoni's feminist charade begin with his Man Enough TED Talk, but the natalist letter was before that. And since Kat is one of my favorite feminists, and the one I first learned about this weird natalist Baldoni thing from, I thought, who better to talk about it with as we unpack Baldoni's faux feminism a little bit more?
Oh my gosh, where to even begin? I think when I first read this letter, I was like, this isn't explicitly anti-feminist. It's just not feminist in nature. But as time has gone on, and with all of the context that we now have around Justin Baldoni, I actually think there's something a little more sinister to this than I had initially thought. And for starters, if you read this letter, this has nothing to do with feminism. I just noticed it because if you go to the original Facebook post that he made, which is like where this letter was originally published, first of all, it's full of typos, which I just found very aggravating. But I think that the main thing that strikes me about this open letter is that it is doing what you'll see throughout all of Justin Baldoni's sort of rhetoric around gender equality, which is that it's really strongly reinforcing gender roles, and it's really strongly enforcing bio-essentialism and using a lot of like red flag concepts that strike me as like being able to logically connect, okay, this is how a feminist persona like Justin Baldoni's can lead to like a full-on sexual harassment Darvo smear campaign. And one of the things that he does in this letter is he talks about these qualities and he describes them as sort of innate to all women, like his wife and also his newborn daughter and also women in general. And one of these qualities is like intuition and a sort of like perfection that comes from having the ability to reproduce. And that is really worrisome to me. Like that to me just gives the whole game away because it's not true, right? Like it's not true that women are naturally blessed with any sort of intuition around having children or giving birth to children. But what that does do is it reinforces that mindset that ultimately makes women to blame for anything that goes wrong in like the childbearing process or the child raising process process, and it pushes all this responsibility onto women. Because what this letter reads to me, especially now, as being is it's like this is the foundation of being able to deploy weaponized incompetency. And this is sort of the foundation of being able to push all of the domestic and emotional labor within the household onto the woman, because this is the role that she is meant for. And it's a letter of praise, like on its face. But to me, it's also sort of like a reinforcement of like, this is what you're meant to do, and I'm not. It's like it's displacing the responsibility of all of these things that come through partnership and being a family unit. And it honestly, like, I would be so concerned if one of my friends' husbands like published something like this right after they had a baby, because I'd be like, is he just planning to not help you at all? And he also even minimizes his role in the actual labor process, where he's like, I just sat there and like watched in awe as like her body did what it was meant to do. And I'm like, that to me suggests that you were an active participant in the process of giving birth, which you absolutely can be. And the fact that he does all of this so publicly is also kind of alarming to me, because it's like, if there was ever a situation where his wife felt unhappy with the way that he was treating her publicly, he could point, or privately, he could point to this public sort of demonstration of, no, look how much I adore you. And like this letter of thoughtfulness and thankfulness for what you did went viral. So how could I possibly be a bad guy? And I really think we're going to see that when if the Blake Lively case does go to trial. I would not be surprised. And in fact, I am like betting on it, that they will cite this whole history of like supposedly feminist involvement in writing and teaching to be like, how could this man ever sexually harass a woman? And I'm like, well, to be honest, if you read it through a feminist lens, it wouldn't come as much of a surprise.
Yeah, I completely agree. One thing I'm really struck by is the part in the letter where it's like it's so subliminal. He says like there are things you as a woman can accomplish that men could never accomplish. And you think about
Yes.
that for more than 5 seconds and you realize, oh my God, he means having babies.
Yes. And it's like two retorts to that. And also another thing he says in the letter that really bothers me is when he talks about glass ceilings. And the phrasing is so aggravating, because the first part of it is like, if you encounter any glass ceilings in your life, as if the glass ceiling is a fictional product of a woman's imagination. And people often use it and employ it as such whenever they need to actually do something about the glass ceiling, which is a real thing that does exist. And there's nothing that women as individuals can do about it. Because the second half of that statement is like, if you encounter a glass ceiling, it's just there so that you can shatter it. And I'm like, it's not women's individual responsibility to remove systemic barriers to their own success. You, as a man in power, it's your responsibility to remove barriers that have been set up to benefit you at the expense of women. But this whole letter and all of this rhetoric just consistently reinforces and like reaffirms this idea that women are really the ones who have the power. And that is explicitly anti-feminist. And now I've taken us off track from what we were originally talking about.
No, I completely agree. And also in terms of like him being a wife guy, right? And that not being inherently feminist. I do not think that it is feminist to be a wife guy, but I think a lot of wife guys
No.
get credit as if it is.
Yes. And it's like, this is just rebranding religion as feminism. And it's religion that has very strict, separate gender roles. And it's rebranding that as feminist. And it's not.
It's not at all. Yeah. Have you watched the episode of Man Enough that his wife is on, where they're talking about how she hates being told how lucky she is to be married to him? Because I feel
Yes.
like he has not done anything to try to make it so that people would stop telling her that, right? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like
Yes.
if I knew that my wife hated people coming up and being like, oh my God, you're so lucky, he loves you so much, I would maybe pull back on the PDA a little bit. And
Yeah.
that doesn't seem to occur to him.
Totally. Yes. And I feel like this is kind of a common thing that abusive people, particularly abusive men, do, is they curate a public persona knowingly at odds with who they are in their private life, because it makes it that much more unbelievable if someone who they've hurt or harmed in their private life ever comes forward with it. They do this knowing that the public is going to point to the TED Talk, the viral letter, the engagement video, and be like, how could this guy who's so devoted to his wife ever possibly do anything to wrong her? And like we see this over and over again with these micro celebrities and influencers, Ned from the Try Guys, like making a big show of loving your wife and loving how she had a baby, and you're sleeping with her or you're cheating on her with your coworker.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's actually a really good parallel. like a subordinate even. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so Baldoni really does love it when his wife has his babies. He did these big elaborate either like I think the first one is just a pregnancy announcement and the second one is specifically a gender reveal. And his response to his wife once they realize that they're having a boy is, "Baby, you get to be done," which to me implies that he was going to make her continue to have a bunch of unmedicated births until she gave him a son.
100%. And I feel like that's exactly what it means. And it's also like, it is so inseparable to me from other forms of religion, because I think about people who I've seen on social media, or I even had this babysitter growing up who is extremely Christian. And every once in a while, I pop in on her social media platform because she and her husband have a ton of kids. They are using social media as a platform to like preach their Christian values. And the content that they make is almost indistinguishable from the content that Justin Baldoni makes, except he refers to it as like feminist, gender equality, like pro women content. And just saying something is feminist, as we've talked about many times, does not make it so.
In 2017, prior to the birth of his second child, so before he told his wife that she got to be done bearing children for him, Justin Baldoni gave a talk, and this was actually before his TED Talk. This talk is hosted on the YouTube channel BahaiTeachings.org, and in it he talks about something of a long-standing fixation he's had on death since he was a child. He tells a story of being present when an uncle died, which he segues pretty seamlessly into a plug for his exploitative docuseries My Last Days, a show about the dying made very much for the living, with reviews that use words like maudlin. Longtime channel viewers will know that I am very upset by this pattern of exploitation of the terminally ill, but I am narrowing my focus only to the faux feminism today, so I have to brush past it for now. You can go watch my video about 5 Feet Apart if you haven't already, and it'll tell you a little bit more. However, I do have to mention the death fixation and his series about exploiting the terminally ill, because it's how we get into the next place where I've seen Justin Baldoni have weird natalist things to say. The part where he likens birth and death to each other, for example, I'll just roll a clip.
The one thing I've learned from every single person I've done a documentary about is, what if we're thinking about death the wrong way? I have made death a messenger of joy for thee. Wherefore dost thou grieve? How can death be joyful? I don't get it. Maybe that's why I've been searching my whole life. But the only place that I can go as a Bahai are to the writings of the Bahai faith. Abdu'l-Baha says the spiritual world and the physical world are mirrors of each other. So, what happens in life that most of the time is joyful? This is one of my favorite things to talk about. Birth. Baha'u'llah says to understand death, you must look at birth. And then maybe it could be joyful. When Abdu'l-Baha talks about understanding death and understanding life and why we're here, he talks about the analogy of the womb world, of the baby in the Matrix. But if you think about it, he says the womb world. Why would he choose that word? The womb world.
So, as you can probably tell by my t-shirt, I find Womb World to be incredibly funny, and also genuinely and actually anti-feminist. My friend Little Shop of Alley recently sent me a paragraph from Susan Faludi's book Backlash, and in it she's summarizing anti-abortion takes from a few decades ago, and it is so close to this womb world rhetoric that it's a little bit uncanny. The anti-abortion iconography in the last decade featured the fetus, but never the mother. In the movement's literature, photographs, films, and other props, the whole unborn child floats in a disembodied womb. The fetus is a conscious, even rambunctious tyke, the mother a passive, formless, and inanimate environment. The fetus is the occupant, the mother its temporary living quarters. But in his speech, Baldoni then goes on to mansplain pregnancy and gestation and really make the pregnant person not a factor in the fetal development. I mean, just listen to this and tell me it's what a feminist says or how a feminist talks about childbirth.
So what's happening in a womb, right? You have your baby completely encapsulated in this unique world, and the whole world is built around this growing soul. And this growing soul has everything that it needs. It has eyes that it's developing. It has ears that it's growing. It's getting its food from its mother. It's the perfect temperature. It has no idea that it's ever going to need these physical things, right? The baby has no clue. It's just, things are just happening, and it's just growing, and it's being fed, and everything's perfect in the womb world. And simultaneously, this growing soul is existing also in a whole nother world that is so far beyond the understanding of this soul. Yet it has no idea that it's only an inch away. And on the other side, an inch away, there is a universe. There is a sun and planets that rotate around the sun. We all know that soul is growing and developing. We know its due date. We're praying for it. We're eating the right foods so that it grows the right way. We're playing it classical music because it's been proven to grow brain cells. That's right. This world can influence the womb world. We're doing all these things, getting ready for this new soul to come into the world. But that little soul who's growing has no idea. And then one day, this little soul has no idea when it's coming. That soul dies of the world that it's been in for the last 10 months. Yes, man, 10 months. It dies of the womb world in a very uncomfortable, painful process for both parties. And it goes through a tunnel, a dark tunnel, and into the light, where suddenly it needs everything that it had just been developing for the last 10 months. The baby's premature sometimes. Well, you can't go back. So you can't go back and redevelop those things. That was your time. So what if birth and death are actually the same? Would that change the way we thought of death? What if it wasn't death? What if it was birth? What if instead of saying death, we just said birth? Would we all still run from it? Probably, because it doesn't change the fact that it's scary and painful and uncomfortable. It doesn't change that there's tremendous sadness because we have love and attachment to this world. None of that changes. But what if we could shift and change the way we think about death and the way we think about birth? Because I guarantee you, when you think about birth, or when you find out your friend's pregnant, or a family member's having a baby, it's joyful. Maybe the joy also is for the other side as well. Maybe the joy is because, in our case, Baha'u'llah, Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, they knew, and they know where we're going.
All right, 2 things to address. First of all, his guarantee does not hold water. It's not always joy that I feel when I find out somebody is pregnant. It's usually, oh shit, do you want that? Is that on purpose? Which is actually part of why I wanted to make the Womb World t-shirts. If you too find this whole womb world thing to be hilarious and anti-feminist, and you would also like a silly t-shirt, you can get a shirt just like this one at the bonfire link in the description below. All the proceeds are being split between 94 different abortion funds throughout the United States. We've already raised almost $200, which is roughly a third of a procedure abortion. I'm really excited about these shirts. If you want one, you can find it in the description below. Second of all, though, I abridged some of it, but we were already expecting it because this was a speech from BahaiTeachings.org. You caught all the religious talk too, right? Don't worry, the Baha'i thing is also something I talked to Kat Tenbarge about.
I'm like, finally a venue to talk about Bahai with the complexity it deserves.
Because, yeah, so the Man Enough TED Talk got a lot more attention than the Womb World one, because the Womb World one was straight up a Baha'i TED Talk. But the Man Enough one also ends on Baha'i propaganda.
Yes. Yes. And the first thing, like when I was studying this religion, which only at a very surface level, but while I was sort of reporting on Justin Baldoni, it became clear to me right away that this is a pillar of who this man is and who all of the parties involved in this lawsuit are, because they're all connected at the root by this religion. And if you don't know anything about it, you might assume, as I did, that it's similar to most of the other religions that you will encounter. Religions like Islam, Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism. But the difference is that those religions are rooted in thousands of years of history. And this religion came about in a much more recent fashion than that. And I pulled this up so that I would make sure I have the dates correctly. But the sort of prophet figure who is quoted in Justin Baldoni's TED Talk and who is quoted in a lot of the religion's literature is this man who was like the son of the founder of the religion. And he was born in 1844 and he died in 1921. So he died as I think I said this in conversation once, like this man only missed the opening day of Disneyland by like 30 years. Like this guy was around within the past couple of hundred years, and this religion sprung from the cultural context of the past few centuries. And so it's not as like when they're pulling up texts and quotes from this guy, I'm like, I think that's really important context that he was alive for a lot of recent history. He was alive for the United States and the religion, because a lot of religious theory and text is rooted in like a completely different cultural context. And oftentimes it's like modernized to at least bring us to the world as we know it today. But that's not the case here. And that's really interesting when you get into the conversation about gender and gender equality, which is supposedly a pillar of like these religious teachings.
Yeah, I was really fascinated once I started looking into Baldoni to realize that it wasn't that he was like a Bahai guy and also a feminist, but that it seemed
Mm-hmm.
like Bahai in general tells its members that they are feminists by being part of this religion, even if they're not necessarily using the word feminist, because of that broken wing of a bird quote, which is
Mm-hmm.
complementarianism. It is
Yes.
separate but equal. Like there is nothing
Yes.
feminist about there are two wings of a bird and one of them is broken right now and they will never be the same thing. They are diametrically opposed from each other. They are opposite things and they can both be as good, but one of them is broken and we're not going to acknowledge that maybe the other wing stabbed the broken wing. We're just gonna that one just got broken.
Yes, exactly. And when you put the things that Justin Baldoni writes and says through the lens of Bahai, it's like it all kind of starts to make sense because this pillar of gender equality within the religion is not understood through the lens of feminism. It is viewed through the lens of biological essentialism. And like the deeper you dig into this, the more sort of revealing it becomes. And the more you sort of dig into like the community's understanding of feminism and gender equality, the more you're like, oh, okay, this is starting to make sense. Because as part of my like reporting and research, I spoke to a few people who were like former members of Baha'i who left the religion for one reason or another. And I learned through some of that research that women cannot occupy like the highest title within the religion. It is reserved only for men. And when you sort of start to look into this more, you'll find posts in like the Baha'i subreddit where members, active members, are questioning this and are like, if one of our pillars is gender equality, then why can't women serve in this governing body? And one of the things that people often say is like, don't you trust these men? Like, don't you trust like the men who came up with this religion? And I'm like, I don't trust anyone who was born after 1850, first of all. But also it's like, I mean, that sort of thinking in itself is obviously not logical thinking. It's like it's pressuring, it's not based, it's based in sort of this idea that like these people have ultimate power and authority and are unquestionable. And that's really common, I think, in sort of religious thought, but it's not transferable to social justice as we understand it today. And it's a really effective way to tell a detractor, to tell a woman in your faith to just be quiet and learn her place and don't raise any more issues with us. Otherwise, your entire foundation in the religious community is now like on shaky footing. So it's a way to shut women in the faith down. And also, when I started to look into like some of the writings around this, what I learned is that the idea of gender in the Baha'i faith is that women hold separate roles than men. It's what you said, it's separate but equal, and that's not really a thing. And we know that that's not a thing because this is where reproductive injustice comes from. And this is like biological essentialism. This is the fallacy at the heart of it. You can't have true equality if you believe that men are to serve one specific role and women are to serve another role. And how convenient that the women's role involves not only giving birth to children and raising children, but it also involves taking on the majority of domestic duties, while men get to have roles in government and in authority, and in these roles outside of the home, in these public facing roles. There are some other things that I'm not 100% sure on because I'm not a scholar of the Bahai faith, but I've read online that like men are expected to do pilgrimages where women are not, because women are expected to stay within their communities and do intercommunity tasks while men sort of go out to profess the faith. And that's very familiar to a lot of other like problematic religions. And in addition to that, there's like a lot of emphasis on this idea and this prophet, this man who's like the guy who Justin Baldoni quotes a lot, who lots of people in Bahai like come back to this man's teachings. He believed in this idea that is so reminiscent to what Justin Baldoni says in his letter and in his TED talk and in his Bahai talk. He's like, women are actually better than men, and that's part of why they can't govern, because it's actually like men's role, because men are kind of like worse than women, but women do have better judgment. Like women are actually like directly connected with God, which is why it's so important that they stay home and that they're the ones to raise our children and that they're the ones to tend to our communities at home, because women are actually better. And obviously, that's really flawed reasoning. And it's used to undergird systems of inequality and say, like, no, 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 no. We're not like telling you have to sit at home while we get to do all of the fun stuff outside of the home. We're actually telling you that, like, this is what you were born to do because you're so good and we're so bad and we're so flawed. But you are perfect. And that's literally exactly what Justin Baldoni says and brands it as feminism.
Yeah. There's I think multiple times, just in the handful of episodes of Man Enough that I've seen, Liz Plank, one of the very few times that I ever see her push against these men is usually in terms of when Jamie Heath is saying something that is benevolently sexist, and he's saying, oh, women are just better than men, and then she's like, well, if you really think that, that's still sexist. And he's like, well, I don't actually mean they're better. I just mean that they're better at communicating and at raising children and the things that we force them into doing.
Yes, and it creates the excuse for like why men are violent and for why men will gaslight you. Like not all men, but it's like it's a very specific excuse for these specific men to be like, it's not a personal failing or an individual one. It is a collective failing of my entire gender. Like men are more prone to aggression. So in incidents of domestic violence, that's one of the reasons why men commit domestic violence, is because men are more prone to aggression. And we know that's not true, and that it is in fact like an extremely harmful ideology to avoid these men having to face accountability for their actions and for their crimes. And how convenient that now Justin Baldoni is being accused of crimes and he is again using sort of this mentality of like, I'm a feminist and Blake is defaming me because she's coming out and saying all these things about me that aren't true. It's so easy to have these like contradictory ideas live next to each other because they confuse and deflect and ultimately excuse bad behavior.
The more famous and credibility garnering of the talks Justin Baldoni has given is his TED Talk, Why I'm Done Trying to Be Man Enough. This was the same year as the Womb World speech, and it, like pretty much everything else Baldoni has ever done, is not exactly actually feminist. Baldoni opens by talking about his career as an actor, and he sells this entire speech with a mock humble thing that I guess apparently really worked on some people, but does not work on me. The idea behind his Man Enough TED Talk is that it's exhausting to try to be man enough all the time. And he gives some lip service to the idea of prescribed gender roles being bad on account of they hurt and exhaust men.
As a boy, all I wanted was to be accepted and liked by the other boys. But that acceptance meant I had to acquire this almost disgusted view of the feminine. And since we were told that feminine is the opposite of masculine, I either had to reject embodying any of these qualities or face rejection myself. This is the script that we've been given, right? Girls are weak and boys are strong. This is what's being subconsciously communicated to hundreds of millions of young boys and girls all over the world, just like it was with me. Well, I came here today to say, as a man, that this is wrong, this is toxic, and it has to end. Now, I'm not here to give a history lesson. We likely all know how we got here, okay? But I'm just a guy that woke up after 30 years and realized that I was living in a state of conflict. Conflict with who I feel I am in my core, and conflict with who the world tells me as a man I should be.
I'm deeply amused by the "we likely all know how we got here" hand wave, because I don't believe Justin does know how we got here. I've heard him hand wave away actual feminist issues or the need to describe them pretty much any time there's a place where it would make sense for Justin to expound on them. We never have time for that. We have time for things like Womb World or a million anecdotes about his father or about Justin's pathological need from acceptance from other men, but never to actually think about how we got here. Because Baldoni is not delivering a TED talk about feminism here. He's delivering a self-help speech with some vaguely feminist trappings, but very vaguely feminist. See for yourself.
But I don't have a desire to fit into the current broken definition of masculinity, because I don't just want to be a good man. I want to be a good human. And I believe the only way that can happen is if men learn to not only embrace the qualities that we were told are feminine in ourselves, but to be willing to stand up, to champion, and learn from the women who embody them. Now, men, I'm not saying that everything we've learned is toxic, okay? I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with you or me. And men, I'm not saying we have to stop being men. But we need balance, right? We need balance. And the only way things will change is if we take a real honest look at the scripts that have been passed down to us from generation to generation and the roles that, as men, we choose to take on in our everyday lives. So speaking of scripts, the first script I ever got came from my dad. But there was another role I learned how to play from my dad, who I discovered learned it from his dad. That role was to suffer in secret. And now 3 generations later, I find myself playing that role too. So some of the ways that I've been practicing breaking free of this behavior are by creating experiences that force me to be vulnerable. So if there's something I'm experiencing shame around in my life, I practice diving straight into it, no matter how scary it is, and sometimes even publicly. Because then in doing so, I take away its power. And my display of vulnerability can, in some cases, give other men permission to do the same.
Once you get past an anecdote where he takes credit for a man proposing to his fiancée, even though the man had referred to the soon-to-be fiancée as his soon-to-be fiancée in the messages Justin shows on screen, so the proposal likely had nothing to do with him, Justin talks more about, like I said at the top of the video, it eating him up that his audience is primarily women.
Now, I've learned over time that if I want to practice vulnerability, then I need to build myself a system of accountability. So I've been really blessed as an actor. I've built a really wonderful fan base, really, really sweet and engaged. And so I decided to use my social platform as kind of this Trojan horse, wherein I could create a daily practice of authenticity and vulnerability. The response has been incredible. It's been affirming, it's been heartwarming. I get tons of love and press and positive messages daily. But it's all from a certain demographic. Women. This is real. Why are only women following me? Where are the men? And see, that's the problem. It's totally cool for men to follow me when I talk about guy stuff and I conform to gender norms. But if I talk about how much I love my wife or my daughter or my 10-day-old son, how I believe that marriage is challenging but beautiful, or how as a man I struggle with body dysmorphia, or if I promote gender equality, then only the women show up. Where are the men? So men. I understand. Growing up, we tend to challenge each other. We got to be the toughest, the strongest, the bravest men that we can be. And for many of us, myself included, our identities are wrapped up in whether or not at the end of the day we feel like we're man enough. But I got a challenge for all the guys, because men love challenges. I challenge you to see if you can use the same qualities that you feel make you a man to go deeper into yourself. Your strength, your bravery, your toughness. Can we redefine what those mean and use them to explore our hearts? Are you brave enough to be vulnerable? To reach out to another man when you need help? To dive headfirst into your shame? Are you strong enough to be sensitive? To cry whether you are hurting or you're happy, even if it makes you look weak? Are you confident enough to listen to the women in your life? To hear their ideas and their solutions, to hold their anguish and actually believe them, even if what they're saying is against you? And will you be man enough to stand up to other men when you hear locker room talk? When you hear stories of sexual harassment, when you hear your boys talking about grabbing ass or getting her drunk, will you actually stand up and do something so that one day we don't have to live in a world where a woman has to risk everything and come forward to say the words "me too"?
And he almost gets towards something like feminism at the end, when he invokes Me Too and he talks about standing up against locker room talk. But like every single time an actual feminist issue gets brushed up against by him, it's only for a second before he moves on. Because when it is time for him to try to take any kind of accountability, the best he can come up with is the fact that he interrupts his wife. And that's something he makes sure to let us know is really unconscious so that we don't stop giving him cookies for even a second.
I've had to take a real honest look at the ways that I've unconsciously been hurting the women in my life. And it's ugly. My wife told me that I had been acting in a certain way that hurt her and not correcting it. Basically, sometimes when she would go to speak, at home or in public, I would just cut her off mid-sentence and finish her thought for her. It's awful. The worst part was that I was completely unaware when I was doing it. It was unconscious. So here I am doing my part, trying to be a feminist, amplifying the voices of women around the world, and yet at home, I am using my louder voice to silence the woman I love the most. Guys, this is real. And I'm just scratching the surface here because the deeper we go, the uglier it gets. I guarantee you, I don't have time to get into porn and violence against women or the split of domestic duties or the gender pay gap. But I believe that as men, it's time we start to see past our privilege and recognize that we are not just part of the problem. Fellas, we are the problem. The glass ceiling exists because we put it there. And if we want to be a part of the solution, then words are no longer enough.
And that part at the end also sounds almost feminist if we put aside the list of things that are clearly less important to him than men's feelings, just getting dismissed as something he does not have time to get into. But like, instead of remaining feminist after that little moment of halfway feminism, the speech immediately cuts into Bahai propaganda instead.
There's a quote that I love that I grew up with from the Bahai writings. It says that the world of humanity is possessed of two wings, the male and the female. So long as these two wings are not equivalent in strength, the bird will not fly. So women, on behalf of men all over the world who feel similar to me, please forgive us for all the ways that we have not relied on your strength. And now I would like to ask you to formally help us, because we cannot do this alone. We are men. We're going to mess up. We're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to be tone deaf. We're more than likely probably going to offend you. But don't lose hope. We're only here because of you. And like you, as men, we need to stand up and become your allies as you fight against pretty much everything. We need your help in celebrating our vulnerability and being patient with us as we make this very, very long journey from our heads to our hearts.
And obviously, Kat and I also talked about this whole feminism, but really self-improvement thing. I can't believe how much credit he got for the feminism thing. Because when you watch the TED Talks and the Bahai Talks and stuff, it's like, if women's rights come up at all, they come up for 10 seconds. And he says, but we don't have time to get into all of that.
I think it really speaks to, and like we've also talked about this before, it's like it speaks to the way that feminism was characterized to most people during the 2010s. And it also speaks to the fact that like this is what people want feminism to be, because it is a path of least resistance. And it's just like, oh, if feminism is as easy as thanking your wife for giving birth to your children, then that would be, you know, a low lift, a low level ask for most people. I also think that the fact that a lot of women responded so positively to that letter shows me that it is a big ask, clearly, for a lot of men. And that's so unfortunate, and unfortunately not surprising that like a lot of men can't even do this like almost like religious centered version of respecting women. But clearly they can't, because this did strike a lot of women in his audience as some sort of spectacular, like notable, noteworthy thing to happen. But it's all just boils down to gender essentialism, which does not serve women in any capacity. And it also completely ignores like the wide range of gender experiences that are not necessarily rooted to biology. Like, as I'm reading the way he talks about women and pregnancy and giving birth, I'm like, you know that men can give birth, right? Like, you know, men can be pregnant too. I've like known men in my life, in my world, to go through the process of like carrying and giving birth to children. So it's like, that's not femininity inherently. But if you subscribe to a biological essentialist worldview, if you're a TERF or a transphobe or someone who doesn't believe that people can transition their gender, then yeah, you are going to associate femininity with like the female reproductive system.
Which, and even for like cisgender women, is super harmful, because a lot of cisgender women cannot reproduce, and that is not a thought in Justin Baldoni's head.
100%. And it's like, it feels so recycled, this conversation, like the fact that we have to keep doing this over and over again. But it's like, yeah, even cisgender women, not everyone has ovaries, not everybody can give birth to children. And whether you're looking at it through the perspective of transness or even just focusing on cis women's experiences, it still wouldn't be applicable. And it's still like demonstrably offensive and harmful to connect womanhood with like our reproductive capacity.
Right. And I feel like also I didn't learn anything about his wife from that letter about how awesome it is when his wife gives birth to his babies. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of person she is. I don't know what's important to her. I know that she suffered and she has a baby, and Justin Baldoni seems to think everybody else should too.
Yes. And I feel like that is such a trope in how he talks about his wife, Emily. The only thing I know about her is I know her name is Emily. I know she has Justin Baldoni's children. And I know that from the very few times I've actually seen this woman, I'm like, she's a beautiful, very conventionally attractive woman. But the only thing he praises her for publicly is what she adds to his life. And that would also really concern me if I saw like one of my female friends, male partners acting this way. Cause I'm like, what is he actually doing for you? He's so obsessed with what you do for him. And it just is like so reminiscent of the stories that you hear and read and encounter in your real life, where it's like a man will just be sitting at home doing zero chores, but he'll be like, oh, baby, but I love you so much. Like, thank you so much for doing all of this. And it's like, your expressions of love and support mean nothing if they do not translate over to tangible physical action.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think they weaponize this concept of like Justin Baldoni wants to pretend to be very aware. I mean, again, one of the things that he mentions and then doesn't have time for, he knows the right words to like gesture at knowing about the domestic split of duties. He knows to
Mm-hmm.
have an episode of his podcast with his wife where they talk about the invisible load of women. But then on that actual podcast episode, Emily is complaining because her husband won't change a fucking diaper. Like she is
Yes.
clearly not getting help with the household chores. She feels completely overwhelmed. She starts crying when she starts thinking about
Wow.
how unappreciated mothers are. So he likes just the fetus stuff, just the womb world stuff. And then
Yeah.
he seems to not care so much once it's actually time to help raise a child.
Yes, and he loves to talk about it publicly. And in addition to being performative, for the reasons that we've talked about, it's just such a concerning pattern. And it's like clearly she is struggling because he talks about her struggle and he brings her forward to talk about her struggle herself. And it's like, so clearly there is a struggle happening here. And you telling an audience in a way that does so much for your own personal platform and for your own career, you talking to people about it doesn't help her in her struggle whatsoever. It clearly demonstrably makes her struggle worse. It's kind of like this like elongated public display of gaslighting, because it's like Emily talks about how things are not as rosy at home, but he continues to go out in public and be like, I'm working on myself, I'm working on myself, I'm working on myself. And if that's not happening at home privately, which it sounds like it's not, then that is like kind of a grotesque form of gaslighting that is involving the public.
Yeah, I really like I like that point of it being gaslighting because I feel like the highest bar that he's ever willing to hold himself or other men to is that they will still struggle and mess up. It's never like we are going to get better. It's we are going to try to get better and we need you to be really, really patient for us because we're doing the best we can and we're not going to do good at it. And I feel
Yes.
like the amount of expectation setting that he sets every time, the low expectation setting that he gives every time that he says like, and I have to grow, it feels like there is no interest in growing. It feels like he's getting off on being like, yeah, I suck. I suck, and maybe
Yes.
someday I'll get better.
Yes, it's like there's another way to read his public performance of feminism that is so much more sinister, but that at this point I believe to be true, which is that it's like it's a way to build excuses and it's a way to deflect from your own behavior. And it is chilling that this has now been described and like prescribed to other men as like how to deal with your problems of not being feminist enough. Because if you were to follow the Justin Baldoni model, the only thing that would be accomplished is these men would feel sorry for themselves. He's literally instructing men in his audience and beyond to like look at the issues with gender inequality and sexism in the world, redirect that and think about how is this hurting me, and then like find solidarity with other men and how they are like ultimately the true victims of this society and of this patriarchy.
God, it's fucking bleak.
It's
It's so
so
bleak when
bleak.
you lay it out like that out loud. Oh my God.
It's
But like
so,
it's true. That's what I think too. It's extreme.
yes.
It's laying such a good groundwork and a groundwork that we can see like demonstrably works. People are willing to completely disregard the fact that like Blake Lively has done a lot of work about like child exploitation, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives her zero feminist credit compared to the fact that
Mm-hmm.
Justin Baldoni has said that it's exhausting to try to be man enough.
Yes. Even like with Blake Lively, I remember there was a quote that I had read months ago. Someone had posted it as part of the hate campaign where they were like, look at what she said about working with Woody Allen. Like, it's so horrible what she said. And at the time I read it and I was like, that's shitty. But then months later, someone provided the full context of her quote, and it was much more nuanced, a much better take when you put it in that context. And it's like with women, the direction that this usually works in is context is stripped to make them look as bad as possible. But with men, it's like the opposite phenomenon happens, where when you put together all the context about Justin Baldoni's feminism, it looks really bad. But instead, we're like clipping little bits and pieces to try to prune it to make it look as good, as convincing as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think even with I reference the "this is what a feminist looks like" t-shirts all the time, but even
Mm-hmm.
then it was men who were getting a lot more credit and notoriety for wearing those than women. Like
Exactly.
women did wear them, and it did for a while become more kind of trendy for women to want to self-identify with feminism, but even then it was a much bigger deal for like Benedict Cumberbatch or whatever to wear that
Mm-hmm.
shirt than it was for a woman to be an actual feminist.
Oh, yes, that's so true, and that's such a good point. And it is so disheartening because I think that like what we're seeing now, and we're kind of out of this, but for like a brief few weeks period, we were seeing this sort of rhetoric around Justin Baldoni where it was like, you can't trust a male feminist. And I totally understand that instinct. And I think that if you were to carry that instinct with you, it would work in your favor more often than not. But what is really unfortunate about that instinct and kind of undermines like the fact that we do need men as part of the feminist project is that like it's not that you can't trust any male feminist. It's that you have to actually sort of qualitatively examine their feminism and discern whether or not it is like grounded in true feminist values. And with Justin Baldoni, I think it's very easy to like look at what he's actually putting out into the world and say, this is surface level. But I think many people, maybe even most people, have this very surface level understanding of feminism. So it doesn't set off any alarm bells for them. They're like, yeah, this is the only way I've seen feminism presented to me. So there's no missing context there. And I think, as you've said, like that's kind of the danger in this like commodified brand of 2010s feminism is now this entire generation, multi generations of people believe that feminism is as easy as just being willing to wear the identity, literally wear the identity. The problem with that is now you are able to have people who use it as sort of a chameleon like camouflage to move through the world in a way where they're maybe showing they're less suspicious, no matter what they're doing, no matter how egregious it is.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I think like people sometimes come at me and they say like you have like a really hardline definition of what feminism is, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's what feminism is. If you ask pretty much any actual feminist, like even if they don't have a catchy slogan, they can tell you what it needs to be doing. And
Yeah.
I think Justin Baldoni even would admit that he thinks that his feminism is for the boys.
Yes, yes. And that like that's one of a key reason why feminism for the boys has always bothered me. It's because it's like well, feminism isn't for the boys. Like feminism benefits boys and men. Like patriarchy is harmful to boys and men, and feminism can be something that reduces that harm, but it's not for men. And in losing that distinction, it becomes really easy to use the label of feminism to support things that reinforce patriarchy, like religion.
Yes. Yeah. Also on the male never trust a male feminist point, my line for that is I can trust a male feminist if he can name me a couple of ways that people other than men are harmed by the patriarchy more than men are. If you can give me that level of understanding, I will believe that you're on my side and that we're working together. If your first points are all about how sad you feel because you're a boy in the patriarchy, I don't care.
Exactly. And then like the male feminist who I've followed and whose work that I've read, it's like it's real work. And I think part of like the side effect of like the social media age is that it's easy to create like a performance of doing a lot of work around an issue without actually putting in very much work. Like from seeing this TED Talk, we have no idea what sort of feminist literature Justin Baldoni has read, or where he's put his money, or what values he actually holds. With like the male feminists whose work I've encountered, it's like these are primarily men who work in some form of academia or some form of like victim advocacy resources, where there are qualifications, there is credibility, there is actual substance. And you don't have to even like read every paper they've written. Just the fact that they've written papers alone is more indicative of like, okay, they're putting in real work. I think the problem with like creating social media content is that it can go one of two directions. And you have to be more discerning as a consumer to be like, okay, this is like feminist content that actually walks the walk and talks the talk, versus this is just an opportunity for a man to build out his own platform in the name of feminism.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. And something else I think is so telling, I know I already pulled the clips for it, but when he's bitching about his audience being primarily women, and
Mm-hmm.
he seems legitimately so disappointed by that. Like it
Yeah.
sounds like and also another piece of context is that TED Talk was at TED Women, and he is standing at TED Women, and he's bitching about the fact that he does not have enough men in his audience. And like, I don't think you would care about that if you didn't think men were a more valuable audience to have.
Yes. Yes. And it's like, it's very reminiscent of the way he reacted to the gender reveal. Like, you can tell because he says it in his own words that he does value men at the very least in a different way than he values women. But he also very clearly values men more than women. And he values the way that feminism affects and interacts with men more than he values the way that it is a reflection of genuine issues that women face because of their gender.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. He makes me so angry.
I know. It makes me hot because it's like it's so difficult, especially now, because a lot of this was happening at a time when feminism, the name feminism, was trendy. So like today, it's growing more and more difficult to find like outspokenly feminist content. And when you do find it, and it is being given a platform, and there is like money being thrown at it and like prestige being granted to it, for that to be the cover for abusive behavior is just so sickening.
Yeah, and so many people are so willing to say, Blake Lively is ruining Me Too and weaponizing Me Too and all of that. And there's never any like I don't know, just acknowledgement of the fact that that is quite literally how Justin Baldoni built his platform. Like
Yes.
it is how he got any credibility. It's the only feminist moment in that TED Talk is when he says
Yeah.
we need to make it so another woman doesn't need to be brave enough to risk everything and say Me Too.
Yes. And it's like, it is for a lot of people who make the criticism that whichever woman is in the spotlight with her allegations of sexual violence, people love to use the argument of like, this woman is hurting feminism, or this woman is hurting the Me Too cause, or my favorite, this woman is making it harder for real victims to come forward. That's the only time that they use language about these issues, is to shame a specific woman, and claim that there is this like mysterious other woman who is being hurt. But in reality, like Justin Baldoni is a perfect example of all of those issues, making it harder for victims to come forward, diluting the meaning of feminism, setting the Me Too movement backwards, and creating the vehicle for anti-Me Too rhetoric. Like, he's the one doing all of that. But in classic fashion, it's blamed on Blake Lively, who is not doing any of that.
Right, right. It's just so much Darvo. It's all Darvo
It's all
all the way down.
Darvo. Always, always.
So I was just gonna say, I also think it's really interesting that he explicitly talks about wanting his social media to be what he calls a Trojan horse, and that
Yes.
is what Wayfarer is for Bahai.
Yes. Yes. And so one thing interesting about Wayfarer is like Wayfarer, the movie studio, is connected to Wayfarer, the foundation. And Wayfarer, the foundation, just announced like this month that it will be like ceasing all operations and shutting down. in connection with this ongoing trial, which I think is really interesting, because from what I could tell from like the publicly available information about the foundation, which was its website, which elements of the website are like being scrubbed actively. But the website for the foundation is very explicit that it is a Bahai faith-driven organization that seeks to provide grants and monetary assistance to these like social justice organizations if they're rooted in like spirituality driven missions. And so basically, like, if the Wayfarer Foundation is explicitly Bahai and it's explicitly tied to the movie studio, then by association, Wayfarer is also explicitly Bahai driven. And we kind of know that it is, because all of the major players within these, or like within these groups, within these corporate entities, are like extremely active, prominent members of Bahai. And like the Wayfarer Foundation is down the street, or the former Wayfarer Foundation is down the street from like this major place of worship in Illinois that's for like the Bahai religious group. So it's almost like it was like on like a campus of sorts with the like with this central organization. I think it's like the largest Bahai church. And Steve Sarowitz, who is a party to this lawsuit and the financier behind Justin Baldoni, he like preached at the church and served as like the president of the foundation, and is on, of course, the board of the Wayfarer Studios.
So when I first started looking into all of this with the Baha'i thing, my first like impression, and then I told myself like, stop it, that's mean. You should be more, like maybe you should be more thoughtful. But even though I'm not saying anything about Baha'i as a whole at this point, I do think specifically Steve Sarowitz and Justin Baldoni and all of their friends, whatever version of Baha'i that they're doing, right? Like I think it does seem to be coming from the actual texts, even if it's like what we see with some fundamentalist Christians where they are twisting things for their own sexism or whatever. But I do think, I wonder is the foundation closing at this point because they don't want to have this so tightly wrapped up with the Baha'i, because we saw in the text messages from Jen
Mm-hmm.
Abel and Melissa Nathan that they wanted to take the Baha'i out of the reporting about
Yes.
Justin. Seems like the first time in the history of Justin Baldoni's life that they haven't wanted Bahai printed next to him in big letters, because he wants to be the Tom Cruise for Scientology, but for Bahai, right? Like that's my
Yes.
first impression, and I keep coming back to it.
Totally. Yes. And I think that that to me seems right, because the very few pieces of information that have sort of trickled out regarding both Steve Sarowitz and Bahai are like they do want to seemingly drive a separation between this ongoing issue and the religious community as a whole. And that makes sense. Regardless of what your religion is or what your community is, no one wants to be associated with this, with the highest profile sexual harassment case of the past few years. But it is really interesting that, like, up until now, they had no problem aligning Justin and the studio and the people behind the studio so closely with Bahai. And it's really interesting. When I first started going down sort of the rabbit hole of how the religion connected to everything, I was like, this is really connected to everything. Like the Man Enough podcast, all of the hosts were raised in the religion. And there are like other celebrities who have converted to Baha'i in recent years. There's like a very active Los Angeles community. And like Rainn Wilson from The Office converted in recent years as an adult, I believe. He might have been a child, like his family might have raised him in it, but it's like you have celebrity converts and celebrities who like loosely grew up in the religion who have become like public facing representatives of the religion. And Penn Badgley was one that really made my eyebrows raise just because of his personal relationship with Blake Lively. And he also, similarly to the Man Enough podcasts, he has his own podcast,
So
which is
does
like
Rainn Wilson.
yeah, they all do. They all have these podcasts. And I think Rain's is the most explicitly tethered to the religion. But the Man Enough podcast is like on the surface, has nothing to do with Baha'i, and neither does Penn Badgley's. And I'm pretty sure Penn Badgley has interviewed like Ariana Grande on his podcast. So it is, highly watched, has this air of prestige to it. But if you look closely enough and if you listen closely enough, there are overt references to the religion, and everyone involved with these podcasts is Baha'i, which is very reminiscent to me of Scientology, which is a religion that is also similarly pretty modern, pretty rooted in the I mean, like literally came to exist within the last few centuries and relies so heavily on celebrity marketing to reach people, because Bahai kind of like sells itself and brands itself as one of the world's fastest growing and like biggest religions. And I don't have the numbers, but I do believe that that's kind of an inflated claim. I had never heard of it. Like most people around me had never heard of it. The only people who I've encountered who have heard of Bahai are people who like either dated someone who was Bahai or have like a family member who was Bahai. And so I don't think it's like as big of a deal as the religion claims to be, but that's part of the selling point in trying to get people to convert. And ultimately, like all modern religions, there's a profit incentive here. Like all modern religions rely on people being faithful and giving money so that the religion can continue to operate. And so I do think that there's likely a through line involving that. And it would make sense for them to distance from the "it ends with us" lawsuits if their ultimate goal is to convert people to this religion that preaches gender equality and ultimately support it in its growth and its expansion and its upkeep.
Somebody on one of my live streams, because we were talking about how, Baha'i is this unifying religion too, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
also part of how they get away with saying their numbers are maybe larger than they are, is because
Mm-hmm.
they're saying everybody who believes everything believes in what we believe in, because we believe in
Right.
everything. But somebody made what I think was a really amazing point where they said, you take this religion that wants to unify all these other religions, and you end up with the common ground in all of them, which is the patriarchy.
Yes. Yes, that's the thing is like there have been religions throughout world history that have not been patriarchal, but of the ones that have survived and thrived in the modern era, the biggest religions all rely on like these very strict gender roles and these very patriarchal systems. And we've seen how various modern sects of Christianity have, in a lot of cases, like presented themselves as something that is more universal and more loving and better than like the strict, rigid hierarchies of Catholicism. But it's not, that doesn't translate into how women and children are treated. It doesn't translate into women are still regarded as the domestic helpers and like the people who lead in the domestic sphere. Part of the insidious nature of this like two arms of the bird thing is like, okay, it's the woman's job to lead in the private sphere, and it's the man's job to lead in the public sphere. And the problem with that, as we all know, is that the public sphere ultimately has control over all the other spheres. But then you can make it out as if like women have an equal role when in reality they don't.
Right. Not only do they not have an equal role, but like they are being told that that is equality, which is
Yes,
it's very sinister. I just
it's
hate.
so sinister.
So have you seen the 2018 Me Too video that the Wayfarer YouTube uploaded?
Yes, I have.
I would say that this is maybe one of the things that, in theory, would, like, if I'm clicking on anything Justin Baldoni has already done and his TED Talk was already not feminist, I would have assumed that the Me Too video was going to be, right? Like, this is something that came out in 2018. And then you click on it, and it is a bunch of men around a table. And, like, I couldn't even, like, not even like a joke. Like, they did not invite women to their table for the Me
Right,
Too
right.
conversation. But clearly, at some point, they realized that they do want to have women involved in this video, maybe because they realized if it was only their dinner party, they would have gotten shit. And so they have these women just like standing in a void, giving these details of like horrendous sexual assault and trauma. They're going into much more detail than any of the men who are at the table share about their own experiences. They are
Mm-hmm.
alone, where the men are talking to each other and comforting each other. It's just really nasty work, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate because for this period of Me Too, where it was defined by celebrities and it was defined by high profile news stories, so much of that, like, this is a perfect sort of distillation of so much of what that movement turned into and what that moment turned into. Because a lot of people don't realize Me Too started a long time before 2017, and that the original movement was started by a Black woman, specifically in relation to how Black girls and Black women were treated and the domestic violence and sexual violence that they faced. And Me Too in the latter half of the 2010s ultimately became this kind of objectifying like spectacle where you had women who were as high profile as possible or who were connected to as high profile men as possible coming forward and sharing their trauma in a way that did not necessarily result in any sort of tangible justice for them. In a lot of ways, it ended up being more re-traumatizing and subjecting them to even more abuse than before. And the people who benefited the most were people who were able to profit from that. So that includes like mainstream media companies made a lot of money and got a lot of awards and gained a lot of prestige from reporting on these stories at the height of the movement. But there was no follow through in sort of that urgency or intensity or that partisanship or that sort of, stated feminism once the like consequences of the Me Too movement set in. Because obviously in the 2020s, we started to see the reactionary backlash to Me Too. And then all of the mainstream media organizations that had touted and profited from these women's stories were no longer like vocal champions of the injustices that they were now facing as a result of them coming forward. And the conversation like quieted down, in a lot of cases went away entirely as victims of all genders continued to face like re-traumatization and abuse and additional fallout. And I feel like this video is a good distillation of that, because even though we don't see like further fallout captured in this video, we see the objectification of these women and their traumas and their stories. And I like the way that you talk about how like even just visually, the men are given a seat at the table and they're given this sort of prominence and they're given this community and this more like tangible humanity where the trauma is like the backdrop to their ability to tout their own bona fides and grow and share and learn and experience.
Yeah, I was watching that on a live stream because I was not expecting it to go into a bunch of women standing in a void telling really triggering stories. And it was like I was like sitting there, I had to start skipping and I was like I'm not skipping because I don't believe what these women are saying, but like I was not prepared to be sitting there and like the dissonance in tone between, this dinner party where they're saying how it's so hard to be a man. And also at the end of it, Baldoni specifically mentions that it's difficult to raise a son. And his daughter was born first. He
Yeah.
does not mention his daughter at all. If somebody did not know that this guy had a daughter and they watched the Me Too video, they would think that he only had a son. And I
Yeah.
think, with the exception of the fact that the daughter sometimes comes up when he says things like we validate our son's emotions but not our daughters.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some very clear, just a lot of follow through from you get to be done now that you're having a boy to like I feel
Yes.
very badly for this daughter, and it really bothers me that somebody could sit around a table and talk in theory about Me Too and about the kinds of things that the women who were coming forward with stories during Me Too had been sharing. And the thing that they're thinking is like, wow, that sucks for my son. That's
Yes.
so fucked up.
Yes. And it's like the way that he talks about giving this like the way that he talks about validating his son but not his daughter is so disturbing and so insidious.
I also try to teach him the vocabulary for his emotions. If he feels something and starts to cry, we validate those feelings. We don't do that for our daughter, we just allow her to feel it. But with my son, we point out those emotions and praise him for expressing them. The world's gonna tell my daughter it's okay to cry, but not my son.
Because it's just another way to reframe patriarchy and what the cultural expectation and reality has always been, and reframing that as correcting an injustice when you are in fact just perpetuating an injustice. Because the problem is not really that like boys and men have not been validated. Like, if anything, the problem is that boys and men have been validated in place of women, and that they've been given prominence, and that women have been like oppressed underneath the needs and the wants of men and boys. So he's just continuing that pattern very overtly, but branding it as feminism.
Something else really interesting about this Me Too roundtable, even beyond Justin's misunderstanding of Me Too itself, is the people who are around the table with him. And we have
Mm-hmm.
Jamie Heath, who we always can expect to be around by now. He's his co-host on the Man Enough podcast, which would start a couple years after this Me Too roundtable. But we also have Scooter Braun sitting at
Mm-hmm.
this table. And Scooter Braun is not Bahai, but I
Mm-hmm.
thought maybe we could talk about how Scooter Braun is related to this whole smear campaign thing.
Yes. And the fact that he is in this 2018 video is such an interesting glimpse into like the behind the scenes of some of the details in this ongoing lawsuit, because the Scooter Braun connection has been raised more recently, but it's clear that the Scooter Braun connection actually goes back further. And that's really interesting to me. But like, as of today, it's like Scooter Braun owns the agency group, which is Melissa Nathan, who is Justin Baldoni's publicist, whose text messages were obtained and leaked. But before that, Scooter Braun was known as the guy who bought Taylor Swift's masters out from under her, leading her to re-record and re-release all these albums. And in addition to that, like, Taylor Swift made this clear in her public statements about it. And you can also glean it from reporting and things that he's said and done. But it's like he has a misogynistic background, and he has aligned himself with people in the industry and with practices that are very misogynistic in nature. Like, I always think about how when Taylor Swift came forward about Scooter Braun buying her re-recordings and why that made her so upset, she talked about like how Justin Bieber had posted on Instagram like a picture of him, Kanye, and Scooter Braun, and they were in like some sort of three-way FaceTime call, and the caption was like, Taylor Swift, like, what's good? And it's like, so you have like Scooter Braun's connection to these men who have like belittled her, who have abused her throughout her career, not, and this is like at the exact same time, in the same timeline as when he's sitting down and filming and recording this Me Too thing with Justin Baldoni.
Taylor Swift, when she made her statement about Scooter buying her records, I believe the words that she used were that he was the embodiment of toxic male privilege in the music industry. I'm pretty sure it was either that or it was something very close to that.
And of course, Scooter never contacted me or my team to discuss it prior to the sale, or even when it was announced. I'm fairly certain he knew exactly how I would feel about it, though. And let me just say that the definition of the toxic male privilege in our industry is people saying, but he's always been nice to me, when I'm raising valid concerns about artists and their rights to own their music. And of course he's nice to you. If you're in this room, you have something he needs.
Taylor Swift had an existing negative relationship with him. In general, he was representing Kim Kardashian and Kanye West at the time of Snakegate. And so
Yes.
when I look at this now and I see, I think of Snakegate, and we zoom back on that a little bit, now we have the full context and we know that it was a phone call where clips were taken out of context and circulated. That's a really interesting and familiar pattern that we've seen with a lot of these other women. It's almost like they learned that if you put out just enough for people to get mad, everybody will run away with it with you. And so
Yep.
we see, I personally feel like I have enough, considering that he fucking owns the agency group, where I look at Snakegate and I say, I think Scooter Braun did Snakegate. And so
Yeah.
because I've had that opinion already for years, and because it feels kind of confirmed by Taylor making it clear that it was uniquely devastating for him to be the one who bought her records, I think about that. And then I think about another very high scale campaign that I think is going on right now, which is the one
Yes.
against Hailey Bieber. And as
Yes.
far as I know, Justin Bieber, according to lots of new headlines, owes Scooter Braun quite a lot of money.
Yep. Yeah. And I think even before this most recent spate of headlines, there was already kind of an assumption or like speculation that Scooter Braun might have something to do with the hate campaign against Hailey Bieber. And that wouldn't surprise me at all, because another thing I think of with Scooter Braun, which I don't think there was ever really concrete reporting on this, but back in the days when Popcrave was like first taking off, and Popcrave today is literally like CNN for an entire generation of people. But in the very beginning, Popcrave was like a newly formed Stan news account, and people who used to work for that account came out later and said that Scooter Braun had a heavy hand in communicating with Popcrave in a favorable way about his own clients, like Ariana Grande, and in a negative way about people who were competitors with his clients. And there were like screenshots of DMs between the official Popcrave account and Scooter Braun. And I like I said, there wasn't like concrete reporting on this in the mainstream news. So it could be exaggerated or it could be made up, but it strikes me as like so on brand for Scooter Braun, because we do know that for a fact he is really embedded in stan communities and in online culture. Famously, he discovered Justin Bieber on YouTube when Justin was a teenager and Scooter was like in his early 20s. And when Justin was trying to get his song Yummy to #1, I'm sure people remember this, Justin posted these infographics on Instagram where he was like, and they were made by stans, and it was like, stream Yummy in your sleep, like stream, like download VPNs to stream Yummy to get Yummy to #1. And so it's like Scooter, throughout his career as Justin's manager, relied really heavily on engagement with stan communities. And he very clearly understands how the online world works in a way that a lot of people in this industry do not. And so it would not surprise me if Scooter Braun had some sort of hand in sort of the online hate campaign against Hailey, which really kicked into high gear around the time that his relationship with Justin was bottoming out. And I think it's like not surprising at all that they would target Hailey over Justin, because they're very well aware that the internet and society in general is operating from a misogynistic point of view. And so if you go after Hailey, you're going to get a lot more organic fan backlash in response to that than if you were to try to go against Justin himself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we have those Melissa Nathan texts about it's just sad because it shows you have people who want to hate women. It makes
Yep.
complete and total sense to me that if they're sitting there trying to come up with a strategy against Justin Bieber, that they go for his wife, which just sucks because as far as I'm concerned, Justin Bieber is also running his own hate train on Hailey. Like he's
Yes.
posting the meanest, stupidest bullshit on Instagram. I feel so bad for Hailey Bieber.
Yes, me too. Like, I feel like Hailey Bieber, out of that entire scenario, is like such a victim of both the way that Justin has treated her throughout their relationship and how Scooter is maybe treating her, and how the public is like so willingly engaging in this like campaign of hate against her. It made me really sad. This past week, she did like a Vogue cover. Famously, Justin Bieber posted that thing where he was like, I told Hailey she would never get a Vogue cover because I was insecure. But in that interview that accompanied that cover, she talked about how she was experiencing like postpartum depression, something that Justin Baldoni has said nothing about in what we've looked at, and how amazing pregnancy is. It's actually very detrimental to the human body and can have all of these major consequences. So Hailey Bieber was experiencing this, and she also was experiencing like body dysmorphia after she gave birth. And she said that in her lowest moments, she would go online and she would find comments that were negative about her body to get confirmation from an outside source that what she was feeling was real. And that made me so sad. And I was literally like, what a horrible environment that we have created for women in the public eye, where that if you are feeling down about yourself, you can find someone on the internet to confirm it for you. Like, that is such a modern nightmare of a world that we have created for everyone to live in.
And it's everywhere with
It's
her. Like
everywhere.
it's not even like it's something that she would need to work particularly hard to seek out. When you have these women and it's going through like And also about the postpartum thing is fucking Blake Lively was postpartum too.
Yes.
Not that he had any grace for that.
Yeah.
Sorry, but like, oh my God, I just realized.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, God.
Yeah, the way that he talks about women post-pregnancy and then the way that he treats women who work for him when they are experiencing like anything after pregnancy is so jarring. And it just lends back to that idea that it's like he's building the rhetoric to excuse himself and for other people to defend him from actions that he may not have even taken yet.
Yeah. And also, I'm not sure what the timeline is on if Hailey would have been freshly postpartum when Justin Baldoni sent the text message of a hate post about Hailey and said,
Yes.
we would need something like this.
And it's like, it honestly, putting all the dots together made me go back to that in my head. And I was like, was that tweet part of something that Scooter had done? And I remember when those screenshots first came out back in December, the account that had posted the anti-Hailey Bieber thread, like posted in a very celebratory fashion about this whole thing. Like I went and I looked for that Twitter account and she was still on, or I don't actually know who runs that account, but whoever runs that account was like celebrating it and being like, I still hate Hailey. So glad that like my hatred for Hailey could like influence this. But it's just like, it did make me wonder if the reason why Justin's mind went to Hailey Bieber, because he clearly knows Scooter Braun quite well, and Melissa, who he was texting with, knew Scooter Braun quite well. I'm like, this even lends credibility to the idea that Scooter Braun is leading this anti-Hailey hate campaign.
I have a lot more things to say about Hailey Bieber and Scooter Braun and a bit more research to do before I can comfortably present all of it, but part of why I haven't managed to fully dive into that research is because of how firmly situated this entire thing is in the misogyny slop ecosystem. With Hailey in particular, it's exhausting because, as is the point of the ecosystem of it all, people pick up and recycle each other's ideas, validate themselves into accepting wild and unlikely confusions as fact, and often they're doubling down into this misogyny in a way that they feel is in defense of women, one woman in particular. As I already mentioned in the call with Kat, a lot of the misogyny Hailey is facing has likely been astroturfed. Another portion of it comes from people who are fans of her husband, who resent Hailey for having married him, so they paint some sort of stalker superfan narrative. But another portion of the misogyny slop that is doing a better job than some others of hiding how it is misogyny slop is the section of creators who are doing these Hailey Bieber slop videos because they feel like it is a defense of Selena Gomez. So, again, more to say once I've done more research, but I do want to point out how fucked up this is. We'll do another video just about this, but in the meantime, honestly, you can go watch the Shansper video from a few years ago, where they did a really good job of pointing out how badly everybody involved here loses. But I do just want to make a point for people who feel like they're doing some defense of their best friend Selena Gomez when they're being super hateful towards Hailey Bieber. You're being weird, buddy. You're being weird and mean, and you're intentionally tying your favorite singer, this woman you stan, to an abusive relationship that's been over with for years. You're harassing a woman in the way that, yes, some of that woman's fans, but mostly her husband's fans, harass Selena Gomez, your favorite. You're getting all sorts of riled up over things like women wearing similar clothes, which is how fashion trends work. Selena herself is not currently out there procuring and sharing misogyny slop about Hailey, and I can't imagine that a priority of Selena Gomez's PR would be to continually tie her to her abusive ex as he continues to spiral and melt down in the public eye. I just want to note that I think it's weird and a little sexist to refuse to allow somebody to be more than their abusive former partner in the discourse. And I think there's a difference between, mentioning patterns in the way Selena has spoken about being treated by Justin and what we see in how he treats Hailey, and in insisting that vengeance for Selena would be to hate the next women in what will be a long list of women who Justin Bieber has been emotionally abusive toward. Go listen to Newspaper by Fiona Apple, and maybe you'll understand what I'm getting at here. But I also just really appreciated the point that Kat was making about how we don't know where these Stan update accounts are sourcing from or who runs them, and how much cover the misogyny slop ecosystem provides to PR firms, for example, who want to use it to their benefit and to nefarious ends. And Kat and I talked about that a little bit more too. In terms of, Scooter reaching out to Popcrave or Popbase, that is so believable to me. And also, I think that there's something really interesting in that where people aren't thinking that PR companies are reaching out to their Stan News accounts that they're getting stuff from. Like they're thinking that everything that they're getting is somebody who's just sitting there and seeing everything online. Whoever's running those accounts can't see everything. They're getting stuff sent to them, and the person running that account might know or might not know that what's being fed to them is being fed to them from a PR team.
100%. And some of those accounts are run by PR people. That was something that I like, it makes so much sense, but I only really learned that over the last couple of years. But it's like some of those big Stan accounts, especially ones like Taylor Nation, are literally run by PR people. Like they are meant to look like organic fan support. And sometimes they're derived from that. But it's like the celebrity world and the world of PR is at this point very well acquainted with the fact that social media shapes mass opinion. And so for years now, they have been a part of that, like very intentionally. And I think one of the things that is so disturbing about that is even if these are PR firms and publicists operating in completely good faith, it still removes entire layers of visibility and accountability and oversight from the way in which they are manipulating the public opinion. Like whether they're just doing like good PR for their clients or whether they're doing antagonistic attack PR on someone else, it's like we have less we have less knowledge available to us than ever about who the stakeholders are in the majority of the content that we consume. And I find that very frightening because it's like it points to just like kind of a frightening ability to like sway the masses on any topic.
And so, yeah, we have the Me Too table where we have, three men who seem to have been completely comfortable with and excited about and content to sway the narrative and to do so in a distinctly misogynistic way.
Yep.
Jamie Heath is honestly, I think it kind of seems like Jamie Heath might have been running more point on the smear campaign than Justin. It kind of seems
Yeah.
like we saw Jamie Heath stepping in. Jamie Heath is the one sending that email and being like, we didn't actually want to give her a producer credit. Our hands were tied.
Yes.
We have, he's covering he's covering his tracks ahead of time before anything has even come out. And he's saying, we're gonna give her this producer letter, and then I'm gonna send something behind her back to Sony and make myself the victim and say that I was forced into it because I know we're gonna do this later.
Yes. Yes. It's like that meme of the gymnast girl where it's like either you're jumping through all these hoops to believe that Blake Lively somehow reverse engineered everything, or you're just looking at what is very clearly laid out in front of you, which is like a concerted effort and plan for like retaliation.
So the a lot of this I've already talked about kind of in the introduction, which you've already seen, but that crisis planning document literally planned to accuse Taylor Swift and Blake Lively
Yes.
of weaponizing feminism. And I can't see anything else that this persona of Baldoni's was doing that wasn't weaponizing feminism.
Totally. And it's so disappointing and unfortunately not surprising that they wrote it out, that was leaked to the public, everyone saw it, and yet they're doing it and it's working.
Still working. I'm getting people telling me that Taylor and Blake aren't really friends, even after Taylor has been completely excused from this lawsuit. And they're saying, well, she was excused from the lawsuit because she gave Justin Baldoni information privately of her own free will. Who is saying that? I can't find that anywhere. If she was giving him information, why would she not then come testify so she wouldn't
Right.
have been excused? Like, I think
Right.
Blake and Taylor won because they got Taylor out of it, which like Blake has been saying from the beginning that she wants as many like third party women not to go through this as possible. It's why
Yes.
she didn't name the other women in her complaint. It's why she's letting people wait and like come forward during court and not before it because she's seeing what's happening to her, what's happening to Jenny Slate. Jenny Slate was getting so much shit. And even
Yep.
like people who are even just like related to Blake Lively are getting so much shit. I can't imagine like the Anna Kendrick comment sections,
Mm-hmm.
anytime she's anywhere, everybody has bought in so fully on this hate campaign that they're willing to just like collaterally damage any other woman who they think comes even close enough to Blake. And it's like,
Yes.
that's not fucking feminism. There is
No.
nothing that Baldoni could have done in his past that would have justified how anti-feminist this thing that he has done and created is. But like,
Yes.
especially not everything we've already been talking about. That's nothing. That's nothing. And then one of like the most misogynistic things going on right now.
Yes. Yes. 100%. It is so like I can anticipate how much of a attempt at sort of like relitigating this narrative will happen during the trial. If the trial proceeds and if it is live streamed to the public in the way that Deb v. Heard was, I expect that we will see a massive astroturfing campaign to try to uplift this, like Justin Baldoni did so much for feminism. And I hope that people can see through that. I think that at the very least there will be a record of people not seeing or of seeing through it to at least counter that narrative. But it is just so like what's the word that I'm looking for? It's just so transparent.
And I know because we talk about this all the time that we both have thought about this a lot. The fact that this is kind of just where we're at culturally.
Yeah.
I knew, this is actually I just got Facebook memories this morning of 3 years ago I was posting on Facebook about the Amber Heard trial and saying how fucked up everything is. And I think, I knew at that time, and I have a comment from 3 years ago where I was saying this is going to keep happening and happening to other women. I know you
Yeah.
knew that too. A lot of the feminists that I follow knew that. It's not even just that Blake Lively is the next iteration of this Amber Heard thing, but it's also that like there's going to be another one. There already
Yeah.
are other ones,
Yeah.
and they're all going to continue to get this compounding thing of like Blake has, oh, you're just like Amber Heard, and the next woman will get, you're just like Amber Heard and Blake Lively, and it just will
Yes.
continue to spiral until again there's just no believable victim because everybody reminds you of somebody who is not really a victim according to public consensus.
100%. Yes. I remember like, because we're so close to the anniversary of the verdict coming down in Deb v. Heard. And when the verdict like hit, I wasn't surprised, but I was just so devastated. On one hand, I was so devastated for Amber as an individual. And on the other, I was just so like horrified knowing what was going to happen next. And it has happened. Defamation cases immediately skyrocketed. And what we're seeing right now with Blake Lively is yet again another defamation case brought as a result of sexual violence claims. So the trend in defamation cases was really demonstrable, and then the rhetoric has been so demonstrable. Amber Heard 2.0, didn't we learn anything from Deb v. Heard? And it's like some of us did learn things from Deb v. Heard, actually, which is why we weren't so quick to believe Justin Baldoni's like retrofitted characterization of Blake Lively. But I also find it so staggering that the people at the center of so many of these cases are the same people. Even going back to pre 2017 version of Me Too, it's like the Taylor Swift smear campaign was again same people, and you saw so much similar rhetoric there where it was like I look back at what happened to Taylor Swift in like 2015 2016 and I'm just like I am so appalled that I didn't see through it at the time, but it's just like such clear Darvo as well. Like this man made misogynistic lyrics in his song, and suddenly that's turned into this whole like she gave him permission on a phone call, like type of thing. And it's just like, even if that were true, which we now know that it wasn't, it still wouldn't be an excuse for him being misogynistic.
Right, and he made a naked wax figure of her body in his music video, and I never hear anybody pointing out that like he committed revenge porn against a woman he
Yes.
was angry with, who he had publicly humiliated. Like
Yes.
even just it these women who are at the center of these, Hailey Bieber too. Like what the fuck did Hailey Bieber do wrong?
Hailey Bieber case to me also shows that you do not even, there doesn't even have to be an inciting incident for you to become the victim of this. Just your proximity to a man is enough for you to become a victim of a smear campaign. Like there was no conflict that it arose from. The conflict didn't involve her, but because she's the closest woman to Justin Bieber, she bears the brunt of this attempt to get back at him.
Yeah. It's horrible. And I think she's like, all of the people who are pointing out to, even in ways that they're trying to do not a smear campaign, but they're like, oh, he's just not into her, like he just doesn't like her. And it's like, is that useful right now? Because I think what's useful, if you can't get riled up enough to defend a woman, which I think is what we should all be trying to do. I think all of us should be trying to be riled up enough to put some defense of these women out there into the world to try to drown out all of this slop. But if
Yeah.
you can't bring yourself to do that, you need to just shut the fuck up. Just keep
Yes.
your mouth shut. If you have something mean to say, you can say it in a group chat. You don't need
Yes.
to put it somewhere where it's going to be useful for somebody's campaign against a woman.
100%. I wish that like 9 times out of 10, people just wouldn't speak, particularly on issues involving like domestic violence and sexual violence, because it's like you do so much harm every time you open your mouth from an uninformed place. And I don't consider myself the ultimate expert on any of these issues. So I take great care in speaking on them, as we both do. And it's like, even though we are more educated on these topics than like the average person, we know the power and the weight of our words and the grave ramifications that like misspeaking on these topics can have. And I hope that one of our cultural shifts in coming years is that people take more accountability, no matter how big your audience is, no matter if you're anonymous, no matter if you're just one person, like putting words onto the internet in any capacity, a comment, like a Reddit thread, a tweet, like any capacity has so much power. And people don't want to accept that because then it would mean like taking accountability for the things that we all say online, which sucks. But we have to do it. And we have to like get over this idea that like, we don't have the power of a journalist or a mainstream outlet, because increasingly as individuals online, we have more power than those institutional gatekeepers. Like that's why we are where we are as a culture.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I have really, really loved reading what you've been doing on Spitfire. You have done a few pieces where you've been talking about these hate campaigns against women and famous people. I already wanted to mention this in a video because I want to link it in my description and get my audience to read it. But your piece about Bella Ramsey recently was really, really fantastic. And I feel like you talked about all of this in a way that helps to contextualize it for how we do see this even when it doesn't seem like there is one specific nefarious bad actor pushing it, right? Because the
Yeah.
reason that this works when we have a bad actor pushing it on purpose is because it also works on accident all the time.
Yes, 100%. And thank you for saying that and for reading Spitfire. I really appreciate it. And with the Bella Ramsey piece, it was one of those moments where I just like wanted to explode, because the other consequence of these hate campaigns is that it makes the internet like an untenable environment for any woman to thrive on. And that is a microcosm of our world and our society in general, which like I think it is hard for people to like necessarily understand, but we all kind of know the feeling. Like I think any marginalized person who has spent time online or in offline settings knows the feeling of being unwelcome and unsafe somewhere. And when we allow these campaigns to thrive and for this rhetoric to thrive, the result of that is that the ability to exist in public and the ability to like move through the world is now made smaller and made more restrictive as a result of like these unbridled hate campaigns toward other people. And I talk a lot about Reddit because it's one of the platforms that I use the most. And for a long time, I wouldn't even go on like the popular pages of Reddit. I wouldn't even go on like the front page of Reddit, because it was such an unfriendly environment for women and for all marginalized people. And that does psychic damage to you over time. It changes how you view yourself, and it can have a really dark reinforcing effect on like the parts of society that are unequal and unjust, where when we come to expect them, that means they are now normalized to us, which means that we feel less of a drive to do anything about them because we just come to expect them. And I hope that as these campaigns continue to happen to celebrity women, that people respond with the appropriate level of disgust and with the appropriate level of condemnation instead of just letting it fade into the background as yet another new normal.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. Like the more that you're seeing these posts pushed to you, the more that it normalizes, and I've spoken about this a lot before, like the idea of, women are just lying, whatever, but it also normalizes just like the idea that it's an acceptable way to speak about another human being. Like
Yes.
in some ways I think we kind of see this with like people who started seeing a bunch of their friends using the R word and then they also started using the R word again. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like this normalization of like, we make fun of if everybody else jumped off of a bridge, but like you might like
No,
if everybody else
seriously.
is using this horrible misogynistic language, that might creep into what you, not even just what you say, but things that you don't even think to correct anymore. And that's really
Yes.
fucked up. Something that I've
Yes.
found is like a useful feminist practice for me is when I'm live streaming and I have a feeling where I'm like, I wonder if I'm being like a nitpicky, like too critical killjoy feminist. But I find pretty much every time that I'm watching something on a live stream and I pause and I'm like, hey, am I overreacting or this is sexist? I'm never the only woman who's thinking that. I'm
Yeah,
usually just the only one who's gonna say it first. And so
totally.
I think that's another thing that like feminism should be calling out things that are sexist. It should be saying
Mm-hmm.
this is not okay and I will think less of you if this is a way that you behave. But somehow that got removed from anything feminism is allowed to do.
100% fully agree. And I think that being social creatures, like a product of our group psychology, is that we don't want to be the odd one out. Like conformity is built into our biology and our psychology. And so when you speak out, when you make an unpopular point, particularly online, I found that when I made like the concerted decision, like I'm going to speak about the Depp Heard trial in a way that's going to make people really mad and is going to be really unpopular. Once I had sort of like made that promise to myself of like, I know this is going to be unpopular, but I'm going to do it anyway. One of the biggest surprises was how many women at all levels of public visibility, completely private and anonymous to like big influencers, were reaching out to me and like thanking me for being the one to say it because they were thinking it too, but they didn't feel safe to say it for whatever reason. And I think the internet has a way of making us think like whatever is visible reflects like what's popular and it reflects how people really feel and it reflects the reality. But like the internet, even though we spend so much time on it, all of us, and so much of our lives are now spent in these online spaces, they're not one-to-one realities. They are like mirror distortions. And so this really hateful opinion becomes like the thing that you see and it becomes like the thing that is continuously reinforced, but that doesn't mean that everyone is thinking it. And in fact, like I think there's like in a lot of cases there's a significant silent population who is disincentivized from speaking up because of what online harassment can entail.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, another, and again, sorry.
No,
Um,
you're okay.
Again, another thing that we have spoken about before is, I don't think that the other side of all of this is ever going to get like a Silicon Valley tech boost in the algorithm, right? Like
Right.
this is our side of things here is not going to be pushed by external forces because our side of things is not useful to those external forces. But I do think that it's not a completely hopeless situation because I have had a lot of optimism and enthusiasm lately about just the concept of like feminist YouTube. I think
Mm-hmm.
in order for there to be a version of feminism that's going to mean anything, people need to be able to learn it from the internet, which for me and for a lot of people who are around my same age, I know we had a chance to learn a version of intersectional feminism through being on Tumblr. And I think the
Yes.
window on that kind of closed. And all
Mm-hmm.
of the feminism that you find online now is very like choice and girl boss and
Yep.
whatever. But there was a time when if you were on the right corner of Tumblr, you could come away with a pretty intellectual understanding of feminism, and you could go and you could learn what else to read. And we can do that on YouTube. A lot of people, a lot of women especially, are already doing that on YouTube. And then our audiences are finding each other and saying, oh, I just
Mm-hmm.
watched this other amazing video. And so I do think that, there's a lot of potential there. And especially if we can get ourselves to like pay attention to, having an actual intentionality about what we're watching and what we're feeding our brain with. And we say, maybe I don't need to watch this gossip slop video. Maybe if I'm going to sit down and watch something, it should be somebody who I know is going to be giving me some interesting things to chew on, or at least who isn't going to like lean into misogyny. Like, I just kind of think that's the only way out of this. So I really appreciate you coming and being part of my attempt to do that.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me and for doing this. I fully agree. And it's really heartening in a time where it can feel very despairing to look at particularly the online content ecosystem and like see what it's giving to us. But I fully agree with you. And I find it really interesting that so many women who I've spoken to in our age range do cite Tumblr as like a formative political environment. It was the same for me. I learned everything like about feminism in my teenage years through Tumblr. I considered myself a feminist because of Tumblr. And Tumblr helped to break down some of the things that I had unknowingly picked up through like my religious upbringing, as like I was raised in the Catholic Church. That was where I learned about abortion. And Tumblr helped me unlearn that and actually develop a very passionate like political persuasion in the opposite direction. And I agree with you. I think YouTube can be that. And I think that social media platforms, we can like take what's given to us and rework it into something we can actually use that is useful to us. And I think that like that feels really hard and really challenging. But at the time of the early 2010s internet, we were just kind of using it. Like we were just kind of on there. We weren't thinking of it yet in this context. We didn't know. And now it's like we use the internet differently. People use the internet with an intentionality that they did not like a decade and a half ago. And through that, there's a challenge, but through that, there's also such an opportunity. And thank you for having me. I'm so grateful for you and the work that you do. And I just couldn't say enough about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So we've already mentioned Spitfire, which that is your independent news reporting. If you would like to talk about that a little bit, I would love everybody who's watching this to subscribe to Spitfire. So I want to give you a chance to talk about it a little bit.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so earlier this year, I got laid off from my job at NBC News, where I had been reporting on a lot of this type of stuff. But within that came the opportunity to really double down in that reporting and say exactly what I wanted to say, which is what I've been using Spitfire as the vehicle for and am planning to continue in the future. You can subscribe for free, which is absolutely fantastic. And if you want to help fund my journalism, which I would appreciate from the bottom of my heart, you can also subscribe for $5 a month and get one paywalled piece a week.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, is there I know you've been a very vocal proponent of Blue Sky, so I'm assuming that
Yes.
that's where else people should find you.
Yes, that is my main home, is Blue Sky and Instagram to a lesser extent. And in line with feminist YouTube, I'm hoping to get there later this year. So hopefully more on that front to come. But thank you again so much for having me, and for everyone who has listened. It's amazing and I really appreciate it.
I am so, so thankful to Kat for having this conversation with me, for coming to be a guest here in the Nuance Corner. Our conversation went all sorts of other places too. You can find a longer cut of our talk over on my Patreon if you're interested in more. Something else that I think a good feminism requires, other than aims and intentionality, is role models. And Kat has been a longtime feminist role model of mine. It's really amazing to be able to call her a friend, let alone a collaborator for this Baldoni deep dive. As I mentioned when I was wrapping up with Kat, I have so much hope and enthusiasm right now for feminist YouTube. Shanspeare's recent video, Just Say You Hate Women, was a masterclass in the sort of work that they've already been doing for years, and I was beyond honored to hear the Misogyny Slop Ecosystem theory pretty much peer-reviewed and expanded on. If you haven't already watched that video, you absolutely should. It's linked in the description. Olay has also been making consistently fantastic feminist content, and I would be remiss not to mention her or Princess Weeks when I say what an amazing groundwork I feel already exists for having these kinds of conversations on YouTube. My friend Little Shop of Alley is also making consistently fantastic work on her channel through an intersectional feminist lens. The thing about feminism not being a thing that you can opt into with a t-shirt purchase or a passive agreement to a slogan, the other half of the thing I was saying in the intro when I was saying you need to insist that your feminism be more, your feminism should be an ideology. You should be able to use feminism as a lens that will allow you to critically examine the world that we live in. And it should be something that you're sharpening against the opinions of other people who you trust and respect. I am incredibly lucky to have a range of feminists to learn from. Feminists like Bell Hooks, who wrote books that I get to read, feminists who make videos I get to watch, who write articles and academic articles I get to read, who leave me incredibly thoughtful and generous comments under my own videos, and feminists who I am friends with, who make content and who don't. My feminism is deeply important to me. That's why I introduce all of my videos as being through that lens. And the connections that I have to other feminists, to other friends of mine, like Kat, like Little Shop of Alley, like Trash Discourse, who also makes videos about feminism and gender, my connection to the things other feminists are thinking and the way they find words for it, it is so much more than just the passive notion that women are people. There is more to it. There has to be more to it, and that's pretty much the point of my YouTube channel. I want to challenge you to try to disengage from the misogyny slop ecosystem as best as you can. And that might be an easier task than finding a circle of feminist friends to surround yourself with is, but finding feminist friends is also not impossible if you're doing actual feminism. I think your end goal should be to find other feminists who you can form actual direct community with, and that a good step to getting there is by refocusing your attention onto the sorts of things you want to feed. Maybe, for example, you don't need to click on an 8th critical thumbnail about a woman who's in the crosshairs of multiple forces targeting her. Maybe your attention could go somewhere else. Even if not somewhere productive, maybe somewhere just a little bit less sexist. Basically, I'm asking you to hold the creators you watch to standards the way that you should any public-facing feminist, and to create a corner of the internet for yourself where you can be asked to think critically in a way that doesn't just mean being critical of a woman. And so you do that, and you keep doing it. You keep checking things against your morals, not against what's most popular. Somebody who's doing that every day, or at least trying to, looks a whole lot more like a feminist than Justin Baldoni does. I can say that much. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you again to Aura for sponsoring this video, and to Kat Tenbarge for being my guest. And thank you to my lovely Patreon subscribers, a few of whose names you can see on the screen right now. Patreon is a great way to help support me financially. I do this full-time not out of unearned confidence, but out of being too disabled to hold down a real job for someone else. It's such an amazing gift for people to support me in this way, to let me make a full-time job out of thinking about feminism. Thank you so much to everyone who has supported me on the Patreon, through the channel memberships, through my coffee, or by super chatting or super thanking me during live streams. All of that is such a huge help. I love you all very much. I'll be back soon. Bye.